Swarming is one of beekeeping's most consistently expensive events, and it is expensive in a way that most beekeeping instruction has never fully accounted for. The visible cost is the loss of the swarm itself. Half the colony's population departing with the old queen on a day the beekeeper was not watching closely enough. But the deeper cost is what remains behind. A post swarm colony has lost its most experienced foragers, its established queen, and 3 to 5 weeks of productive time while the emergency queen cells develop. The virgin queen mates, and the new queen's laying pattern establishes itself. If the primary nectar flow arrives during those 3 to 5 weeks, and in most temperate regions it does, with a precision that does not adjust for the timing of a beekeeper's management failure, the colony misses it entirely. The frames that should be filling with surplus honey are empty. The population that should be foraging is rebuilding. The season that should be producing is recovering. Amish beekeepers have been managing around this sequence since the early 1800s, not by preventing swarming in any absolute sense, but by intercepting the swarm impulse at the biological moment, before it becomes irreversible and redirecting it into a controlled split that preserves the forager population, maintains both colony units in production, and eliminates the 3 to 5 week recovery period that conventional swarming imposes. The method they used is not complicated. It was not invented by an exceptional beekeeper. It was the practical outcome of observing what the colony was telling them before it told them with an empty hive. The modern beekeeping literature treats swarm prevention as a reactive practice, something you do after you see queen cells, after you notice entrance congestion, after the colony has already committed to swarming at a biological level that makes reversal increasingly difficult. Add a super. Add another box. Checkerboard the brood nest. These are interventions applied to symptoms that have already declared themselves. The Amish management philosophy was built around a different diagnostic sequence entirely. Before any queen cell appeared, before any bearding at the entrance, before any visible preparation had occurred, the Amish beekeeper was reading two specific biological signals that preceded all of those visible symptoms by 7 to 14 days. Signals that the colony produced in the brood nest itself, not at the entrance, not in the form of queen cups, but in the ratio between available laying space and the colony's current population density. The first signal was brood nest compression, the progressive occupation of cells that had previously been available for laying by incoming nectar, pollen, and capped honey, moving upward from the supers and downward from above. When the queen's laying area contracted below a specific threshold relative to the number of nurse bees in the colony, the physiological cascade that led to swarm preparation had already begun. The second signal was nurse bee crowding, the accumulation of young bees in the upper hive body with no brood to tend, a condition that created a surplus nursing population whose biological pressure towards swarm preparation was measurable in the colony's behavior at the frames, before it was visible at the entrance. The Amish beekeeper who opened his hive and read these two signals correctly had a management window of 7 to 14 days, a period in which a controlled split could redirect the colony's swarming energy into a productive second unit without triggering the biological crisis that conventional swarm management attempts to defuse after it has already reached critical pressure. The controlled split the Amish executed in response to these pre-swarm signals was not simply a matter of dividing the colony into two boxes and hoping both survived. It was a precisely sequenced set of frame transfers designed to accomplish three specific biological outcomes simultaneously: relieve the brood nest compression that was driving the swarm impulse, provide the surplus nurse bee population with brood to tend in the new unit, and ensure that the original colony's forager population remained intact and associated with the original hive location rather than following a queen to a new site. The sequence began with the selection of frames. From the compressed brood nest, the Amish beekeeper selected 2 to 3 frames of capped brood. Specifically capped brood, not open larvae, not eggs, but fully sealed pupae within days of emergence. The selection of capped brood was not arbitrary. Capped brood requires no active nurse bee feeding. Its removal reduced the nursing demand on the original colony without triggering a brood feeding crisis. The bees covering those frames, primarily younger nurse bees whose orientation to the original hive location was not yet fixed, were transferred with the frames into the new hive box. A frame of honey and a frame of pollen accompanied them, providing the new unit with immediate food reserves. Then, and this is the step that distinguished the Amish method from every other splitting approach of the era, The new box was positioned not beside the original hive, but at a completely different location in the apiary, at least several yards away and ideally facing a different direction. The original hive remained exactly where it had been. When the field foragers returned from their morning flights, they returned to the original hive location as they always did, because a forager's orientation is fixed to a geographic point, not to a particular queen or a particular set of frames. The original colony retained its entire forager force. The new unit received the nurse bees who had not yet fixed their orientation flights and who would establish their orientation to the new location in the following days. Both units operational, no forager population split, no recovery period, both producing from the week of the split. The queen management within the split followed a principle that modern beekeeping instruction has consistently complicated beyond what the biology requires. The Amish approach was specific and unambiguous. The original queen stayed with the original hive. Always. This was not a preference or a variable based on the queen's age or laying rate. It was a structural decision made in service of the forager retention objective. The original queen was the biological anchor that kept the original colony's population cohesive through the disruption of the split. Foragers returning to the original location needed to find a queen-right colony, one whose pheromone signals communicated stability and ongoing productivity. A colony that lost its queen to the split box and received only a queen cell or a virgin queen in her place would show a measurable behavioral disruption in the days following the split, with forager activity reduced and in some cases, foragers drifting away from the depleted colony. The Amish beekeeper left the queen exactly where she was. The new unit received no queen cell, and no virgin queen at the time of the split. It received something better: the capped brood frames that contained viable queen cells in the form of worker larvae, young enough to be converted to queen cells by the nurse bees if they chose to rear a replacement queen. The nurse bees in the new unit, finding themselves queenless, would assess their brood and initiate queen rearing from the youngest available larvae. A biological process that required no intervention, no purchased queen cell, no grafting, and no queen introduction equipment of any kind. Within 4 days of the split, the nurse bees in the new unit would have selected their queen cell candidates. Within 12 to 16 days, a virgin queen would emerge. Within 21 to 28 days of the split, she would be mated and laying. This timeline, combined with the capped brood emergence that was already underway in the transferred frames, meant that the new unit never experienced a complete population collapse between the split and the new queen's laying commencement. The timing of the split was the variable that determined whether the method worked as described or produced the same disruption as any other poorly timed intervention. The Amish split window was not defined by calendar date. It was defined by a specific intersection of two observable biological conditions that had to be present simultaneously before the split was worth making. The first condition was population threshold. The colony had to be covering at least 7 frames of bees, not brood bees, before the split could generate a second unit with sufficient thermal mass to maintain brood nest temperature across the nurse bee population that would be transferred. A colony split before reaching this threshold produced a new unit too small to sustain its own brood temperature through cool spring nights, resulting in chilled brood, failed queen development, and a weakened new unit that required months of recovery rather than weeks. The second condition was the presence of the pre-swarm signals described earlier: active brood nest compression and nurse bee crowding. A colony that had not yet reached the physiological threshold for swarm preparation did not benefit from a split, and it was disrupted by one. The population was divided at a moment when the biological pressure that made the split productive had not yet accumulated. Both resulting units were weakened without cause. The Amish beekeeper who split too early produced 2 struggling colonies where one strong one had been. The Amish beekeeper who split at the correct intersection, strong population and active compression signal, produced 2 productive colonies where one frustrated one had been. This precision is the entire skill of the method. The frames and the sequence are straightforward. The reading of the intersection is what requires seasons of observation to develop, and what no catalog can sell as a substitute for accumulated practical knowledge. The management of the original colony in the weeks following the split addressed the second potential failure point that the Amish had identified through generations of practical observation: the replacement of the laying space that the split had temporarily removed. When 2 to 3 frames of capped brood were transferred to the new unit, the original hive received 2 to 3 frames of drawn empty comb in their place. Not foundation, drawn comb, previously built cells, cleaned and ready for laying, that the queen could move into immediately without waiting for wax production. This is not a minor detail. The split was made in response to brood nest compression. The queen's laying space was already contracted. If the empty frames inserted to replace the transferred brood were foundation requiring new wax investment, the compression condition that had driven the swarm impulse was not relieved. The queen encountered new building work rather than new laying space. The swarm impulse in the original colony continued building toward the same threshold it had reached before the split. The drawn comb insertion was the relief valve that the split was intended to provide. Open cells accessible to the queen immediately, expanding her laying corridor in the same inspection in which the brood frames were removed. Within 48 to 72 hours of a correctly executed split with drawn comb replacement, the forager departure patterns in the original colony normalized. The accumulation of idling foragers at the entrance, one of the earliest behavioral signals of swarm preparation, diminished. The queen's laying rate, which had measurably slowed during the compression phase, stabilized and increased as open cells became available. The colony was not redirected. It was returned to the biological conditions under which swarming was not the most adaptive response available. The swarm impulse subsided not because it was suppressed, but because the condition driving it had been corrected.